Hello again and welcome back to our course on Project 2019. In this section, I'm going to tell you a few more things about baselines. Now, we've already set a baseline for each of our two projects, the wedding and the bathroom refit. And I want to talk to you about what happens if you need to change a baseline first of all. Now, there are various situations in which a baseline might need to be changed. In some cases, you may have a reason legitimately to change a baseline. In other circumstances, it may mean that rather than changing the baseline, you perhaps ought to be saving a new one. So let's start with what might be called a legitimate example of changing a baseline. So I've done this plan for the wedding. I've set up the costs, I've sorted out my resource overallocations, etc. And as far as I'm concerned, everything is looking good. So I decide to save my baseline. And just after I've saved the baseline, I realise that I've left something out. And the thing I've left out is the best man or the groomsman's tuxedo, which I know is going to be a cost to the wedding. And so really, this is not a case that the cost of the wedding has been exceeded because of something changing. It's just a straightforward mistake. We've left something out. It should have been in the baseline in the first instance. Now, essentially, I don't want to start all over again. I just want to add that one task to the baseline. So let's see how we can change the baseline. Now, the way that I would normally do this is by making the changes that I need to make and then doing a set baseline, but only for selected tasks. I don't know if you remember when we went into set baseline last time, there was that option there. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to insert the task that's missing. And I'm going to put it after select and order groom tuxedo. So I'm going to right click, insert task, and I'm going to add the task that I've missed. So that task has been added, and I'm quickly going to switch this table back to baseline view. So into tables, more tables, and baseline. Now you might be tempted at this point to say, okay, well I can fill in the baseline figures just here. I can put in the baseline start date, finish date, so on and so forth. That isn't really how baselines work. When you want to add an item like this to the baseline, or you want to change an item, you need to do it by setting the normal fields up and then doing a set baseline, because Project 2019 does a certain amount of calculation. So there are a couple of things I could do here. So for instance, I could bring up the task information box by double clicking, but instead of doing this, I'm just going to cancel out of there. I'm going to change back to normal entry view. And I'm going to change the settings for this task. So I'm going to say that it's a 20-day task. And what I'm also going to say is that it really needs two resources. So one resource is going to be a little bit of time by the groom to help the best man choose a tuxedo. But I'm also going to need the cost of the best man's tuxedo. So let's jump across to the resource sheet and insert a new cost resource. And to keep things consistent, I'm going to put it underneath groom's attire. I'm going to call this best man's attire. It's going to be a cost resource, and the accrual is going to be end. And let's just add some initials in there as well. So there's my new resource. It's a cost resource, of course. And as I say, I'm just going to need 10% of the groom's time just to get involved in the selection of the best man or groomsman's tuxedo. So what I'm going to do is going to jump back to the Gantt chart, and we're going to assign that resource to this task. And again, we've done this a few times before. And we're going to say that we need 10% of the groom's time. And there we are. So now we have an over allocation on the groom's time. And we have one more thing to do before we look at that overallocation, and that is we don't want the best man's attire to be started until we've started on selecting and ordering the groom's attire. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and select tasks 14 and 15, and I'm going to establish a link between them. And in fact, with that process of linking those two tasks together, the resource overallocation is resolved anyway. So having done that, what I'm going to do is select that single new task there, task 15, and I'm going to go up to the project tab, and I'm going to go across to set baseline and click on set baseline. Now make sure that you do have the correct baseline selected, which is this one, the only one we have at the moment. And I'm going to say set the baseline, instead of entire project, selected tasks. And in fact, in this case, only one new task has been inserted. Now there are a couple of important checkboxes here, and I'm going to briefly explain these to you. Now if you add a task like this, note that it isn't only individual tasks that we store baseline information for. If we have a task within a summary task, so in this case, this task, task 15 that we're looking at, is within the attire summary task, then I'm sure you notice that we have baseline information for the summary task. And in turn, baseline information for the phase that the summary task belongs to, in this case, the preparation phase. And in turn, baseline information for the whole project. Now, in the process of adding this task, we have to decide whether we want to change, whether we want to update the baseline figures for all summary tasks up the tree, if you like. So essentially, do we want to roll up baselines to all summary tasks? And you can see we have a checkbox just there, which would allow us to do that. We also have the option of selecting which summary tasks we want to update baseline information for. This is called rolling up the information. So if we wanted, for example, to leave all of the original totals as they are and just add the individual task, we wouldn't check either of those boxes. Now on this occasion, I'm going to say roll up baselines to all summary tasks. And I'm going to click on OK. Now I'll get this message that says baseline has already been used and then the date. Are you sure you want to overwrite the data in this baseline? So that's just giving me a warning that I've made a change, and if I select yes, it's essentially going to overwrite those changes for that baseline. Now I'm happy with that because I want to add this task into that baseline. So I'm going to click yes. And then I'm going to go back up and I'm going to select baseline table. And now you can see that for our select and order best man tuxedo task, we have all of its baseline information saved. Now at this stage, I have two other things to tell you about in relation to baselines, and I'm going to, if you like, join these two topics together. And one of them is copying baselines, and the other one is the use of interim plans. Now it's very often the case that particularly in long projects, things do change. And after a time, it becomes inappropriate to measure progress against an original baseline because so many things have changed. Now we're talking here about the scope of the project rather than just things going wrong. But there often comes a point when you decide that what you really need is a new baseline to measure the project against. Now, best practice normally says that whatever happens, you're going to save the original baseline. And the normal way to save a baseline in Project 2019 is to copy it. I mentioned there are a total of 11 sets of baseline fields. So many people copy the original baseline to baseline 10, and that's the convention that's used as a way of keeping the original baseline. Now that's just a convention. You can actually copy any baseline number to any baseline number. But the reason for putting these two topics together, as I mentioned just now, is that you do it as part of what appears to be setting an interim plan. An interim plan is in effect a sort of low-fat baseline. An interim plan is, if you like, a baseline with just the start and finish dates in it. Baselines in general store information about work and costs and durations. They're all in the columns that you can see in front of you in the baseline table here. An interim plan only has start and finish dates in it. Now, if you want to set an interim plan, if you go to the Project tab and go into Set Baseline again. The second option there, Set Interim Plan, and what you do when you set an interim plan is you copy something to something. So I could copy the currently scheduled start and finish dates to start and finish 1. Now that pair of start and finish dates constitutes an interim plan. But what we actually want to do here is we want to copy our baseline. So from copy, I can select baseline, and I'm going to say copy into, and I can select any one of these. And as I said, good practice is to start at 10 and work backwards. So we're going to say copy baseline into baseline 10. And as you can see, by default, it's going to do the entire project. So if I was to click OK now, my entire baseline is going to be copied into baseline 10. So really, it kind of makes a backup copy. That's it for baselines and this section in general. Please join me in the next one.